All right, I'd like to call to order the April the 12th, 2011 meeting of the City Council. And may we have roll call, please?
The record will reflect that Councilmember Rosansky is absent.
Okay. And then we'll proceed with the study session. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Clarification of items. Councilmember Daigle.
I have none.
Councilmember Curry. And Councilmember Selich.
I have none.
Councilmember Hill.
I have none.
Mayor Pro Tem Gardner.
None. Aren't you glad I brought that?
Yes. I have one item to clarify. And I'll get to Councilmember Rosansky. Did you have any clarification items? All right. Then, with regard to item number 4, on street paving, I wanted to know, this is the Central Balboa, I believe, will the new streets be concrete? I believe the streets that they are replacing are concrete. Will the new ones be concrete?
Right. The existing streets that they're replacing.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. That takes care of the clarification items then, and we'll move on to the study session. And the first item on the study session is the loud and unruly gathering ordinance. Do we have a staff report?
We do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. As you noted, this is a proposal to enact an ordinance at an upcoming meeting, if you so direct us, related to loud and unruly gatherings. And I'd like to introduce the police chief to make the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Mayor, City Council members, good afternoon or good evening, kind of in between there. Tonight we're going to present to you a loud and unruly gathering ordinance, proposal for this ordinance. Before we do so, I first want to give some credit to Captain Dale Johnson, who's not with us today. He's actually back in Quantico at some training. But he actually did a lot of the legwork for this, really did the homework for this, the research. This comes to us from Tucson, Arizona, they have this in place now. He went back to Tucson. We sent him to Arizona to actually see how this works in Tucson, to see if it's something that would actually work and fit here in Newport Beach. And he thinks it would, as do I. But we've kind of passed the baton on to Lieutenant Hartford, our acting captain, while Dale's gone, to really lead us through this ordinance tonight and the proposal, and to just answer any questions you might have. So with that, I'll turn this over to Lieutenant Hartford.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, council members. I want to present the proposed loud and unreasonable gathering ordinance. And this is the basic elements of the ordinance itself. And I'm going to focus you, obviously you can read it, loud and unruly gathering, just of 8 or more people. But if you look at the bottom 2 items, where it focuses on loud and unruly conduct that occurs and results in a nuisance that's a threat to the public health and safety and general welfare, or the quiet enjoyment of residential and nearby properties. And that's the basic focus of the ordinance and its intent. And this is what we define. You may ask, well, what is a loud or unruly gathering? And these are basically what an officer would look for to define what a loud or unruly gathering is and how to enact that proposed ordinance or affect its enforcement. Here's what we call the posting of the red tag, which is a key part of the proposed ordinance in this program. The officer observes this unruly gathering. He notices the location. He believes that it's a public nuisance. He posts a sign, and then also what he does is he writes a crime report, and a notice is sent to the property owner. And it's unlawful to remove or alter or tamper this tag. And what it basically says is if within 180 days, if you have any additional loud or unruly gatherings that are defined by those elements, there will be civil fines. And this is what the red tag looks like. Obviously, it's very noticeable as you pass by. It has this rather unique fluorescent orange color. Some may consider it offensive. And this is the individuals that will be subject to these civil citations, what we call the responsible person. And if I direct you, this ordinance, what it focuses on is it focuses on the people that attend these gatherings that cause the problem. And if you go down to number 4, it'd be any person who attends a loud or unruly gathering and engages in the loud or unruly conduct. And this is a tool that the officers are going to be able to utilize when they go to these loud and unruly gatherings to really make it affect, straighten out the situation, and try to resolve some of the challenges that we have with these loud or unruly gatherings. This is where I've gone into the enforcement. The officer responds to the resident. He observes the violation. He detains the persons responsible. He can, even on the first violation, he can not only post this notice, but he can issue the civil citation as well. And this is the citation fines. And I know the media has gone to a great extent to notice the 4th violation for $8,000. There's a lot of specific elements to that, being that the 4th violation has to occur in our safety enhancement zone, obviously the 4th of July, between 32nd Street and 54th Street, within that 27-hour window that's designated by the ordinance. And this is the 4th violation. If you don't get it by the 4th violation on the 4th of July, I think you probably deserve an $8,000 fine. And this is the associated red tag fines. If you do remove or tamper with the red tag, it is a criminal offense, subject to a $1,000 fine or 6 months in jail. In addition to that, there's a $2,000 fine. If the owner allows the removal of it or directs someone to remove it, that's also an additional $1,000 fine. There is an appeal. Obviously, there's an appeals process associated with this. The appeals have to be made in writing within 30 days, and it goes much through the same process as our administrative citations. Obviously, it goes before a city's hearing officer. How does this proposed ordinance help the police department? As I've mentioned, this gives us a tool to actually address the people that go to parties and cause the problems. And I think this is going to be extremely effective for an officer's toolbox. Obviously, we have the disturbance advisement card program that works towards the owners as well as the people that rent the properties. This is going to address those party goers that come down to the city of Newport Beach and cause problems at these loud and unruly gatherings. And this is a citywide ordinance. It's both effective on the east side of town as well as the west side of town. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Bill, I have a question to start with here. It appears to me that in the event that I'm having a party and some people come that I really didn't want to be there in the first place, and an officer comes and it's loud and unruly, but I'm trying to get these people to leave my premises, is there an exception under this proposed ordinance where I might not be fined?
Yes, Your Honor, there is. Yes, Mr. Mayor, there is.
Okay. All right. And then if I'm an owner of a property and I've put together a lease that has provisions that enable me to go back to a tenant that's being unruly or that perhaps is violating an ordinance or whatever, and there's been a red tag, let's say, on the property, and I take steps to try and start the eviction process, if you will, of that tenant, or otherwise take steps to ameliorate the problem that generated the red tag in the first place, and I can demonstrate that, does that exempt me from paying a fine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So the ordinance then would appear to have provisions in it that provide relief for people who are trying to do the right thing here.
It's reasonable as measured, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. Other council members? Councilmember Hill?
Well, I had a question about the 180 days. If a property owner had taken the action to try to correct that problem and had moved those people out, is there any relief to the leaving the sign up for 180 days? I mean, you've got a unit that you've vacated. Are you still penalized with having that up there?
No, Councilmember Hill. We'd assist him in removing the tag, and then he'd be able to rent that residence again. Obviously, we're here to assist and work with the property owners and the property managers. And in fact, in the city of Tucson, as part of this ordinance, they worked with the property managers to give them language to write into their lease that if they are subject to a red tag, that they can immediately evict those individuals that are renting the property, and that there would be a process to relieve them of the red tag once those individuals have left.
Okay. Councilmember Selich?
On the appeal hearing, is there any fee in addition to posting the fine?
I do not believe so.
Okay,
Councilman.
so there's no cost to the appellant?
That's correct.
Councilmember Daigle?
Yes. Can you go back to, I think it's about your third slide or so, when you talk about unruly persons? Right there. Any person who attends a loud or unruly gathering and engages in loud or unruly conduct, how when you say they're responsible, then what's the proposed penalty?
Yeah, this is where they engage in this conduct, and then this will be the fine mechanism that we have.
Okay, so the red tagging is only done for the property
That is correct.
of the owner.
Of the residents that
Of the
the
residents.
officer goes to that's having a loud and unruly gathering.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any way to put a red tag on the individual?
Yeah, I know.
Scarlet letter D.
That's what I didn't know, was a red tag on the forehead or their house, or how that was going to work.
I try probably best for me to refrain from talking about that.
Okay. Councilmember Curry?
Yes, thank you. Lieutenant, based on your experience, about roughly, over the course of a year, over the course of the 4th of July, how many parties do we come across that would fall into this category that would be potential citees? Just, sort of an estimate.
Currently on the 4th of July, Councilmember Curry, I'd say quite a few.
Quite a few. And as I understand the safety enhancement zone fines, those are only during the 4th of July period, it's 27 hours?
Yes, Councilmember.
So that would be somebody who's having a raging party pretty much nonstop, and he got a ticket every 6 hours?
It's concerning the response. So if the officer comes back a second, third, or fourth time, those individuals that are classified as the responsible parties will be issued those civil citations.
Is it possible to simply disperse the party at that point in time?
I think that'll be the officer's first effort, is obviously to try to gain some compliance. Obviously, this is a tool that we use. It's a reasonable measured tool that we utilize with individuals that really aren't responding to our efforts to quietly disperse this party. And if the officer believes, based on his experience, that this activity is going to continue, he's probably going to disperse the party, post the red tag at the location, and if he feels necessary, issue civil citations based on his first response, because he's not garnering any cooperation from those individuals.
Right. I mean, I think the practical application is we would disperse the party and take somebody to jail or otherwise remove them from the premises rather than coming back 4 times and writing an $8,000 ticket in real life.
That's correct, Councilmember.
Yeah.
But obviously building it in, it gives us that effective tool.
Now, this is also applicable to commercial facilities, bars? No?
So it's specifically to private residences.
All right, so it doesn't apply to businesses. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Selich?
Yes, I'm looking at the definition of responsible person, and I'm, I guess, a little bit confused. Under number 1, where it says any person, including any business, company, or entity who owns, rents, leases, or otherwise has control of the premises. So if I own a piece of property and I rent it out to someone, who is the responsible party? Me, the rentor, or both of us?
It could be your guests, the person that you rent to, and yourself. But it comes to the officer's discretion as far as, responding to the location, determining what the problem is. If the renter's not the problem, then it's those individuals that are attending the party, which is the basic focus of the proposed ordinance. He's going to address those individuals that are the problem. If it's not the renter, if he's trying to get these people out of his house saying, hey, I don't want these people here, and we do have that occasionally, especially on the 4th of July, uninvited guests that are intrusive, that do cause the problem, the officer is going to focus, obviously, on the individual that is causing the problem. And he's going to be reasonable and measured. If the renter's trying to work with the officer to get them to remove these individuals, that's what the officer do, and the officer doesn't necessarily have to put the red tag up.
So if an owner has it in his lease provisions to adhere to this ordinance, does that get him off the hook as a responsible person?
I believe, I'm going to have to refer that to Kyle Rowan.
Councilmember Selich, as long as the owner or managing agent has it in their lease provisions and they use reasonable measures to abate the responsible parties, then they would not be responsible for it. But if they just have it in their lease and they do nothing after the city gives them notice that we're having this issue at the property, then they would be responsible.
So how do you divide the fine up then between a renter and an owner? You split it in half, or?
Each of them is subject to whatever fine amount.
So
So
if you had both,
theoretically,
it
if
would
there's
be,
10 people at the property that are engaging in the loud or unruly conduct, each of them would get the $500, or could be issued a $500 citation, plus whoever owns the property or managing it could also be issued a $500 citation.
So in the event of where the person owns a property and doesn't pay, does that become a lien on the property, or how do you go
The
after
city would
collect-
go, the city would go through our traditional collection measures as we do for other administrative or civil fines.
But I thought I saw in here where the property there could be a lien issued against the property.
Correct. The city has several mechanisms to go about that. I do not know what our revenue staff routinely employs, but that is one way, is to lien the property.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rosansky?
Yeah, I just want to understand it. So let's just take it from the beginning. So they get a call, or they're patrolling the area, and they find this unruly party. So the first level of action is to post the notice. Well, I mean, they're going to approach the party, whoever's there, find the responsible parties, and talk to them. And they're going to make the officer's going to make a determination as to whether he wants to post this house or not. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councilman.
All right. Is there any potential for issuing a ticket or a fine at that particular point?
Yes, there is, Councilman.
And is that the $500 fine?
Yes, that'd be the first violation, a $500 fine.
All right, so he can actually post it with the red tag and issue the $500 citation on the first call to the property
That is correct,
in the
Councilman.
officer's discretion.
That's correct.
And then, I'm sorry?
The officer, more than likely, if he feels it's necessary, he'll issue those citations to those people that are the responsible persons that are causing the concern. He'll post the residence and disperse the party.
Okay. And so at that point in time, though, the landlord or leasing agent, like Burr White Realty, they lease a lot of property, they rent property, so they're not responsible at this point in time?
They'll receive notification that the red tags.
But they're not responsible, they're not going to get a $500 initial ticket?
That is correct, Councilman.
Okay, so now 2 days later, they go back out there, and another big party. So what happens then?
And if they.
Actually, let's call it 30 days later. So now you've mailed the letter to the owner.
If we've mailed the letter to the owner and the location's been red tagged, and they're allowing this to continue with full knowledge that we've red tagged the location, that we've identified this as a problem location, I would assume that they would be subject to a fine.
Okay, now which fine are they going to get, the $500 fine or the $1,000 fine?
Well, it's based on the violation, so it'd be the first violation fine.
But the property, the responsible party at the home is going to get the second violation fine?
If he was one of the initial individuals that was cited, so if we go out there and we cite the renter on the first violation, and we come back the second time in your scenario 30 days later, and he's there, he's part of the problem, he's going to get a second citation, and he's going to be subject to the $1,000 fine for the second violation.
Okay, so there could be different first or second violations depending on who you are.
Yeah.
Okay, let's layer another layer on top of this thing. So you have party people there, and the officer decided the first time to cite someone there drinking and being disorderly. Okay, so they've gotten the $500 citation, and how is he going to know whether they got the $500 fine 30 days later or not?
It's much like our current DAC system, the disturbance advisement card system that we currently use. They'd receive a letter from revenue indicating what their fine is, and that it was a second violation.
So the party goer would not actually, they just get a ticket, but they wouldn't know what the fine was until they received it in the mail.
That is correct, Councilman.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Gardner?
Well, to me, this seems like a wonderful tool. As someone who has gotten up at 3 in the morning and put some clothes on and stomped down and said, please, would you stop? It's time, and had them just sort of look at me like, what are you doing out of bed? These are pretty egregious behaviors that we're listing. It's not just having a party, obviously. You can have a party, you can have some music, you can have some fun. But when you are littering, when you are publicly drunk, which means staggering around outside, when you're serving minors, when you're parking so that people can't get in their driveways and everything, this is the kind of behavior that isn't fun for, except I suppose if you're at a certain, you've had a few, and you're a certain age, you might find that really nifty. I remember that a bit myself, I suppose. But for most of us, it's no longer acceptable, and so I think this is an excellent start. I'm very pleased with it.
Councilmember Daigle?
I did have an additional question about your fees, if you can go back to that, the violation fees. So if you're in the safety enhancement zone, say people rent a property for a week and they've come to enjoy the beach and have a party, and so let's say within 3 days, 4 days, they rack up 4 citations. Is that possible?
The violations specifically are specifically within that 27-hour period for the safety enhancement zone.
Okay. Could you get 4 violations in that period?
In a 27-hour period?
Yeah.
I'd say it'd have to be one hellacious loud gathering.
Right, but that would be $16,000 and $16,500 in fines because you add those all up, right? It's not really $8,000; it's $16,500.
And I'm sure the neighbors of that individual that's causing that problem would appreciate us issuing those citations and trying to address that problem.
And it would go to the property owner. They would also be billed.
There'd be some additional fineage if the property owner is allowing this to occur and knows that we have posted a red tag.
Okay. So if the property owner says, well, it's in my lease with these vacationing visitors that they pay, the city doesn't really care. I mean, that's up to the property owner and the visitor to work out. We don't get involved with that.
Councilmember Daigle, for the property owners, they could be subject to the first violation, but there's a provision in the draft ordinance, it's 10.66.040 for the property owners that once they receive the notice from the city, because obviously they may not be present at the time the loud and unruly gathering is, they have 14 calendar days to pass before they can be subject to the next increased fine level. Okay. So a property owner, if we had a very loud and unruly gathering on the 4th of July in the safety enhancement zone where they hit that 4th violation level, the property owner would still be only at the 1st violation level. And then if they demonstrated due diligence in resolving the situation and removing the responsible people from their property and had the conditions in their lease, the tag could be removed and their fine could be waived.
Okay. But the property owner is still responsible for paying. And if he says to you, you know what, it's really, I have this lease, I wouldn't think you'd say, oh, well, okay, then I just read your lease and they pay. I mean, wouldn't you say go get the money from them?
Well, the property owner may have it in their lease that they get reimbursed from their tenants, or they could. That's a civil issue between the property owner and who would be the responsible person, not between the city and the property owner.
Okay, so the property owner has to pay the city irrespective of what their lease says.
Unless they have the provisions in their lease and they demonstrate due diligence in resolving or removing the problem individuals.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Selledge?
Yes, outside of the peninsula and the safety enhancement zone, how many times a year would you say that you would be posting houses with red tags in the rest of the city, based on past incidences?
Based on past incidences, we have locations on the east side of town and throughout the city that are obviously be subject to this proposed ordinance. I can only think on a rare occasion of specific locations in my experience as a police officer where this would apply.
So it would be like more of the higher density areas like Corona Del Mar and Balboa Island?
Balboa Island. Yes, Councilmember.
Councilmember Rosansky?
All right, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when I asked you about the posting of the notice and whether the owner would be fined on the first violation, you said no, but you said yes. So which is it?
The owner could receive a fine for the first violation.
All right, so he doesn't have to wait until he gets notice of the red tag? Because the officer said
when
that
he gets notice of the red tag, he could receive at the same time the fine. If the owner shows he would not be subject to an increased fine level
For
until
14
days afterwards.
But he could get the initial $500 fine just
Correct.
because the renter had a party and was unruly and got
Correct.
red tagged.
As long as then the owner, following notice of that, proves to the city that he had a condition in his lease regarding loud and unruly gatherings and shows due diligence in resolving the situation, then the fine amount would be waived and they would not be liable
But
under
they
the
still would be
ordinance.
subject to the first ticket.
No, that would be removed. They would not be liable.
No, they get the ticket, and then they have to do something to have the
Correct,
ticket
correct. They have to
expunged.
address, the city's going to put the onus on the owner
Right, okay.
or the manager, property manager to solve the situation.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hill?
How does the owner find out?
The city mails notice to them. The ordinance requires that we have to mail a notice to the property owner.
Well, so there could be an event, and the owner would not, and if the event happened on Friday, it'd be written up, the owner wouldn't know until Monday or Tuesday. If they were gone already, what avenue would they have to do to prove that they were doing, I mean, it seems to me that the issue could be over. The owner would have something in the lease, but wouldn't have any opportunity to do anything to resolve it.
Well, if the responsible persons have left the premises and they aren't one of the owner's tenants that are there, then the owner may have adequately addressed the situation by advising the tenants to prohibit these people from coming back.
How does he know to advise them?
Well,
They're
the owner
already
would
gone
get,
before he finds out.
the owner would get notice. The owner's clock to, if you will, their time to correct and their time to, for the 14 days doesn't trigger until the owner knows about it. So the owner's not,
That's my point, I guess.
Well, but the
The-
point
we're not
here
asking
is
the
that the owner has the opportunity at a later date to get the fine rescinded if he can demonstrate reasonable action to deal with the problem.
But how can he demonstrate reasonable action if the problem has ended and he didn't know about it?
we're not asking the owner to accompany the police officers out there to abate the problem location. The owner needs to address and then follow up so that we don't have repeat offenses with the same people at the premises. And if the owner then refuses to do that or does not show due diligence, then that's where the owner would be
Okay,
liable.
so somebody has rented their property, a party takes place in the property, and the owner gets a notice in the mail, which best case scenario is going to be 2 days later.
Best case, okay?
It may be three days later.
It may be 2 weeks later. I don't know. We have owners that may live across the country and processing time
Okay,
for
so in
holidays.
that period of time, the problem resolved itself.
And in that
Okay.
case, then if the owner shows and is able to demonstrate sufficient proof to the city that either the tenants have moved out, they're no longer there, then if they're able to demonstrate that to the city, they would not be subject to the fine amount in the ordinance.
Or that he's taken action to prevent future occurrences of that
Correct.
problem.
Correct.
Okay. Is that-
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have, oh, I'm sorry, Councilman Rosansky?
Oh.
Okay. I have an additional question. How long has this ordinance, an ordinance like this, been in effect in Tucson?
I believe it was in 2006 they enacted it, Mr. Mayor.
And did you have conversation with the Tucson police about how well it's working, problems that they've had with it, et cetera? Did it have the intended effect?
I personally did not. Captain Dale Johnson did have that conversation, and they felt it was a very effective tool.
Okay.
And if I may reiterate, on several occasions when officers go to these loud or unreasonable gatherings, the initial, who's the renter, who's the owner, who's in charge here? And I can't tell you how many times they say, well, he's gone, he's out, he's passed out, whatever the case may be. Right? This provides us an effective tool to address that type of problem.
Tucson's a college town?
Yes, Councilman.
Councilmember Selledge.
We have known problem areas in the city. What would be the difficulty in just making this applicable to the problem areas and not the whole city? Is there some kind of discrimination aspect to that or anything?
I'd have to refer that to the city attorney, Farron.
The council could apply it to various areas in the city. We just need to carefully define those areas and articulate reasons why. So it is within your discretion. We've already limited it to just private residential properties and not commercial establishments within the city. So it could be.
So we'd have to have a documented track record of problems to justify doing that, basically?
I don't think we need a documented track record. We need to document the reasons why we're limiting it to certain areas and why not the entire area or all residential zones within the city. I could think of several justifications that's not based on prior history, that's just based on the unique nature. Newport Coast versus Corona del Mar, Balboa Island, or the peninsula area where you have denser populations versus properties that are larger and more spread out. So those could be acceptable justifications, should the council wish for us to pursue that.
Councilmember Rosansky?
Well, yeah, first I'll comment on what Councilman Sullivan said. Quite frankly, I think it's an all-or-nothing proposition. I mean, why, if it's, if I live in the Port Streets and my neighbor is a troublemaker or problem maker, I mean, it hurts me just as much as someone who lives on the peninsula or Balboa Island. So I don't know why we would differentiate from one area of the city to the other. So I definitely wouldn't be in favor of that.
Well, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just trying to get the parameters of this ordinance.
I understand. I'm just letting you know, because that undoubtedly attaches a certain stigma to certain areas, and I don't know why we would want to stigmatize certain areas of our town. As far as another question I had in the operation of this ordinance, okay, so let's say, go back to my scenario, we have a guy who's got a party, he's got partygoers there, he gets a citation at 4200 Seashore Drive. I'll just give an address. I don't even know if it exists. And then the same partygoer 2 months later is at another party, let's say at 5300 River Avenue, okay, and another unruly party. Does he get the first violation or the second violation fine? Is it site-specific, or is it just you're unruly and
it's responsible person specific. So if he's the responsible person, and he has this track record for going and causing or being part of, and as it's indicated here, he's at a loud and unruly gathering, and he's contributing in loud and unruly behavior, and this is his matter of pattern and practice, this is a second time, it'll be a second violation. Because obviously he's
So he'll get the second violation fine, is that?
Correct.
I'm looking at the city attorney here because I want to make sure that we get the same answer this time.
The fine amounts are in Section 1066060, and when you read A, because I'm just going for the standard citation amounts, it's just the first violation, a second violation within 180 days of the first violation. It doesn't require that the responsible person and the property be the same. So if you have the responsible person that is liable for the fine, and it's their second violation.
So anywhere in the city, they're subject to the increasing amount of fines. It's not just at that one house.
For the responsible persons.
Right, for the responsible
For the
person.
property owners, it would attach to the
Right, whatever
property.
level they were.
I just want to make that
Yeah.
distinction.
Now, do these people who, like, I imagine that, don't leave. No point in you getting up and down like a jackrabbit here. Obviously, a renter or homeowner, if they got their home red tag, they would know it was red tag. But, like I saw a picture up here, it showed, the red tag on a door. Well, let's say that's not visible. Is it going to be visible from the street? Is that exactly where you're planning on putting it? Because, if I'm entering property, there's multiple ways to enter, and I might not even know that this is a red tag property. Even if it hasn't been removed. I mean, I may just crawl over the patio wall or something, and it could happen, And do they need to know that the house has been red tagged to receive these?
Yeah, the officer, as part of this investigation, is going to put it in a location that's visible from the street. He's also going to utilize a camera to document the elements that he observes for the loud and unruly gathering, and he's also going to complete a crime report. This is going to be posted in a location that's visible in the street, and obviously that's the reason why we have this eye-catching color, if you will, so that people are aware that this location's been posted and that we will take the necessary enforcement efforts to follow up with this proposed ordinance.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, do they need to see the actual notice to be subject to these fines?
They do not necessarily need to see the notice, but there's nothing in the ordinance that prohibits the officer from posting it, as you say, if the property has two access points, maybe from an alley in the front. The officer could post it in 2 separate places. Just fill out the form twice. That might address your concern that people might not be
Well,
able
I
to
mean,
see
they
it.
can come in off the alley. I mean, a lot of people come through the alleyways and come up the, you know,
So they can post it on the alleyway side and then post it on the front patio side, if you will.
All right, well, I don't really have any more questions, but I do have, I guess, a comment. And, you know, generally I like where we're headed with this because I think we need to do more. But I think in the past, you know, we've had fines in the past. We have DACs, and there are fines in place today, correct?
For the DACs, yes, there are fines in place. Those fines start at $100. It's been my experience with talking with officers for the city that they've gone to parties, and if they issue a DAC, they'll see a collection hat going around, and people will chip in to collect for it.
Okay.
The $500 fine amount may seem like a lot for a first
I'm not
violation.
getting to the fine amount. The issue, I think, is issuing the citations and issuing the DACs, and I think that's been part of the problem that we've had here.
DACs also just go to the
I understand.
property
This is
owner.
a different program. I'm talking about enforcement now. It's great if we have this program, but it's not so great if we don't actually issue citations for the $500 fine, the violations or whatever. So not only, you know, we're giving you a tool, but if you don't use the tool, then the tool is wasted. Might as well not have it, is my point. And I think that's the problem we've had in the past, is that we've had tools, but they haven't been used effectively to their ability. And, you know, now we're going to have bigger fines, which, okay, you know, I can roll with that, but if we don't issue one violation, then what's the point?
I respect that, council member, and I'll put this to you. I'll guarantee you this will be a tool that we will utilize, because the intent of this proposed ordinance is to stop the behavior.
Good. Well, I think in the past that there's, and even in this ordinance, as you're explaining it, there's a lot of discretion involved on the part of the officer to issue the thing or not issue it, to post it, not post, who to give the violations to. And so, you know, I'm not saying that we should just plaster, you know, West Newport or Balboa Island with red tags. You know, I mean, that's not a solution either. But I'm saying that we need to use the tool.
And we will, council member. We will use the tool.
The other comment I'd like to make is I'm a little nervous about the fact that of the property owners and how they're being assessed the same way, and I think that needs to be rethought a little bit, especially on first violation. I mean, it's one thing to notify. I think you should notify the property owner, and he should take corrective action. I liked it better when he was saying, well, on the first violation, he gets notice, but he doesn't get fined. On the second one, he does get a fine. I mean, I think that's fair. But for a property owner who's not there and maybe have never had a problem with the property, you know, there's a lot of circumstances I could think of where, you know, a situation can occur, and, you know, why should he have, you know, I think he needs to do certain things, you know, vis-a-vis his renters or whatever, but to actually fine him on the first offense when he may, well, certainly probably didn't have anything to do with it, I just don't think that's a fair thing to do.
All right, Councilmember Curry?
Well, in going back to Mr. Rosansky's question, we talked about we're going to cite responsible parties if they move around from place to place. Now, if the person's the host of the party, you can sort of see how that might work. He may host a party in a different location, but the definition actually says that any person who attends a party where there's loud or unruly conduct is a responsible party. So are we going to give a citation to everybody at the party?
We could, council member Curry.
We are.
We
Okay.
But they have to be engaging in that conduct
in the
as well.
conduct. The loud, you know, it defines it as a loud and unruly gathering and participating in that loud and unruly behavior.
All right, so we red tag the premises, but everybody gets a similar citation, or what happens?
If they meet those elements of the loud, that they're participating, if they're the person who attends or a loud or unruly gathering and they're engaging in the loud or unruly conduct, yes, they'll get the citation.
And we'll somehow keep track of that, so if they're cited next week, we've got a party across town, we'll know it, and they'll get they get something more?
They'll receive a letter from the Revenue Division indicating that they've been cited a second time. And as I mentioned, the intent of the proposed ordinance is to stop the behavior.
Right. Okay?
So there's
You got a red,
there's realistic limits here. I mean, an officer is not going to take 3 hours to cite 45 people at a party, I would imagine. You're going to select those individuals who are engaging in the most egregious behavior and cite them.
Yes, Mr. Ray. And it comes down to what's reasonable and what's measured. And,
Yeah.
and that's why we train our officers the way we train them.
Councilmember Selledge.
Yeah, I'm looking at the definition of loud or unruly gathering and just trying to understand how that's going to be enforced. So the police department gets a complaint for someone, they come out to an address, and there's obviously a loud party going on, but everyone quiets up as soon as the police get there. And then when you leave, then they start up again. I mean, how do you deal with that situation?
Well, we have been known to be sort of sneaky. And so we park around the corner and we sort of wait between the howl and we watch the residents. We observe the behavior, the violation of the ordinance. Our supervisors are equipped with the little flip cameras. We document it via the flip camera, and then the officer documents it, and he goes in, makes contact with the owner, affects the citations that need to be effected to those responsible people that are in violation of the ordinance, and posts the location.
So what is the, I guess, the quantitative measures that you use to determine this? Because, it says loud or unruly conduct occurs. What kind of quantitative measures do you use for that?
Well, if they're screaming and yelling with the drink in their hand and I can hear them down the street, that's probably bothering every single neighbor on the block. And it's time to affect this ordinance.
Okay.
The answer is it's at the discretion of the officer.
It is at the discretion, yes, Mr. Mayor.
Do we have any other? Okay. I had one more question, and then people in the audience, you've been patient. We'll get to public comment here. How do these fines compare to the fines that have been used in Tucson?
That I can't answer, Mr. Mayor. I don't know.
Okay. All right, one more. Councilmember Hill.
If we were to enact such an ordinance, how would we communicate with the property owners to let everyone know that this ordinance was in place?
Obviously, we used an effective media campaign to indicate that. We've already received, as you can see, some effective media attention concerning our proposed ordinance.
And I'm guessing
Is that what these big things are in the back of the room?
Yes, council member.
And I'm guessing that the property management companies will be very proactive in engaging in changes in leases and so forth and getting this in place because they're at risk as well, are they not?
We look forward to utilizing them as partners in trying to affect this proposed ordinance.
Okay. Let's go to public comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone wishing to comment, please come on down.
Good evening, Council. First, I want to thank Lori Morris, West Newport. I would like to thank the chief and the officers that went to the trouble to go to Tucson and try to figure out the solution to a problem that we do have on the peninsula. And I do think it needs to be citywide. It should not be just directly towards the peninsula. I'm sure there are other places that this happens, and we shouldn't be directly targeted again. But we all live here in Newport Beach because it is a vibrant, outgoing community. And, being at the beach, everybody says, well, you know where you are, you know where you're living, you should put up with that. And that's why we're here. We like to be outside, we like to be around people, we know there's going to be parties, nobody's against, parties on the weekend. The permanent residents work during the week, during the summer, and this has become a big problem for us. We have been around this block before as far as fining people. The triple fining isn't working on the holidays. It's not working really in the summertime. The officers do give a lot of leeway to people having parties. They don't squash things like people, they've got this thing going around that they're jackbooting. They're not. I live there. I watch. They don't. But being a vibrant community, it turns to violence. We are subject to a lot more than just loud and unruly. It gets out of hand. The fighting, chasing each other down the street, urinating on our properties. I get up in the morning on some weekends and I'm hosing down vomit quickly off my patio because I don't want the water fining going on. I don't want someone to catch me watering it off the patio. So we have that issue too. But this isn't the Vegas Strip. These are our homes. These are our neighborhoods. And people come down in the summertime, vacation, that's great. We love to have visitors. It's the beach. That's what it's for. but we're not the Vegas Strip, and we should not be subjected to the same things or be, forced to. This is what our officers are for. This is what our city council is for. This is what this is being enacted to protect us. And I applaud the effort. I hope you all, with all these questionings, I hope you get all your questions answered and get this enacted quickly for this summer. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is George Schroeder, and I've been a 23-year resident on 35th Street here in Newport Beach. First thing I'd like to say is I appreciate all the concerns that Councilman Rosansky, Ed Scully, and Rochelle did have raised. I am a landlord and a property owner down here for about 22 years now. Currently, I have about 9 people paying me rent right now. At one time, I had 16 people. I'm down to 9. I have read the ordinance twice with a highlighter, and there is language in there that does give me some concern where the property owners can be fined and held as a responsible party. But even with that language in there, I'm not as concerned about it as the issues we have to deal with living down here right now. So just to come to a conclusion, I do support the ordinance. I would like to see it go into effect. There are certain behaviors that happen down here because there are people that come here that believe they'll be tolerated here. Once this ordinance goes into effect, the information will get out there. And, the concern that a person gets a citation at one party and then he's across town in 2 months. Well, if he's at the first party standing on a block wall drunk and he's urinating, he gets a citation. If he goes up to a party in Newport Heights and he's standing on somebody's block wall drunk, screaming and urinating, he should be a red tag person and he should get an increased fine because this is the type of behavior that if I'm a tenant, I'm not going to want that guy at my party. And oftentimes, it's the guests at the party that behave the most inappropriately because they don't have anything to lose. They're down here, there's free beer, they just want to tear it up. So we need to cite them also. Okay, and of course they're not going to cite the person who's standing on the side holding the beer being quiet. They're going to cite the person who is doing this outrageous behavior. One question I have is in Tucson, and I've looked up that ordinance, the threshold is 5 people. I'm concerned about the 8 people because the people that do this behavior, they're kind of clever people, and if they see a policeman walking up, they'll have 7 people on their patio only. They might have 15 in the house and 15 people going out the back gate in the alley out the back. So the threshold in Tucson is 5. 4 people being loud and obnoxious and drunk at 12 o'clock with the stereo blasting is an out-of-control party. 8 people, I think you should bring it down to, 5, perhaps 6. And then also, with this in effect, I think oftentimes the police are going to come, and it's just going to end up being a DAC, a Disturbance Advisory Card, which has a fine system. And I, as a property owner, I get those fines, and I'm surprised because I've done everything I can to screen the applicant out to get older, married people with kids, and every now and then, they'll disturb the peace. So I do have a 5-page lease right now. Pass this ordinance, and I don't care if it's 12 or 15 pages, I'll attach this to the lease, I'll make them initial and sign every page, I'll put language in there that if they violate this ordinance, I can evict them, because I don't want to pay a fine for a behavior that I've done everything I can to make sure it doesn't happen. Thank you very much, and want to support the police 100% because right now police resources are being wasted on this type of behavior that should not continue to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Well, Mayor and council members, my name is Joe Reese. I live on 30th Street here in Newport. I just want to say that I'm really happy over the last several years, all the positive things that the police department's been doing, this council's been doing with regards to improving the quality of life in my area where I live on the peninsula. I think a good example is what we're doing with the 4th of July committee, trying to make it more of a family event as far as instead of all the craziness that we have had over the years down there. And I think this operators permit ordinance that we've done for the bars and taverns and ABC establishments is another positive step towards taking care of this unruly behavior. This is, to me, is probably the most critical step of it, because this is where we have the most problems. And really, I appreciate, Councilmember Rosansky, your concerns with regards to the owner, but I think the police department and also the city attorney's office is going to do their best. In reading the ordinance myself, it appears that they're making every step possible for the owner to clean up the problem without receiving that fine, if they take the steps to do it. Unfortunately, I've talked to many owners and many landlords in the past who are very slow to respond to the issues and problems within their properties and kind of blow the issue off, and that's why it becomes even more of a problem, because then these individuals continue that bad behavior. I can tell you this from experience. My daughter went to the University of Arizona. My son-in-law went to the University of Arizona. They definitely are well aware of this process, the red tag process, and this is one of the best deterrents for bad behavior that happens. And you talk to the police officers in Tucson, and they will tell you that. And I don't think this is necessarily an enforcement tool for the police department. I think what this is a deterrent. It's going to stop the bad behavior from coming. It's going to make the individuals, put them on notice that this behavior is not acceptable in Newport, and that's the message we need to get out. And that's what I think we're trying to send by this, and it's not so much we're going to go out there and enforce and enforce and enforce. No. It's to let the owners know it's not accepted, to let the tenants know it's not accepted, and to change the image that we have down here to a more positive family type of image instead of this party-going type image. So I applaud the police department. I applaud the city attorney's office for doing this. I think it's a step in the right direction, and I ask that you approve this for the residents here in Newport. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Hello, my name is Sandy Pearson. I'm a long-term resident in Newport Beach. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for getting a serious attention to this problem created by party houses. A few years ago, my neighbor sold his property to an absentee owner from out of state, and they converted into a weekly renter. They advertise as a weekly, weekends, daily, proms, weddings, nightly parties, and we'll even help you arrange that party. We actually dread this summer. We actually dread every summer. Our neighborhood is typically a very young family. My neighbor has 6 young kids, and the other has 3. It is a vibrant, wonderful area to be and for a family. But when you put in, and my husband works very early, you put in a party house, we have loud noise constantly, excessive alcohol 7 days a week, swearing is a given, public urination. We have pictures and pictures and pictures of public urination. Parking problem, given a tremendous amount of trash, are the norms in this property. We have repeatedly spoke with the owner and a property manager. And by the way, the property manager was one of the problem who threw parties, and nothing ever changes. Recently, my neighbors and I had a meeting with Officer Sanborn, and he was fabulous. But there's only so much he could do. It seems to me a lot of times his hands are tied. And when my neighbors are collecting $8,000 a week in rent, and it's 12 months out of the year, and I'm sure it's $8,000 a week during the summer, much less during the off-season. But you finding him $100, $500 is not enough. It is not a deterrent. But if we could get them to raise these fines, so it does become a deterrent. When you take in $8,000 a week and you fine them $8,000, I'm pretty sure they'll change something. I'm asking the city to please raise the fines and help us. And please help us help the Newport Beach Police Department do their job more effectively and efficiently. We need the help.
Councilman Rosansky?
Yeah, before you leave me out, if you would, please pass the address of that property to the city manager, because in order for them to rent like that, they do need a permit to do that from the city.
They do have a short-term rental
Okay,
permit.
and that was going to get to my second question, or direction here, is that maybe we somehow can incorporate that into the ordinance, that if they do receive a certain level of violation, that they'll be subject to revocation of their short-term rental permit.
so much for that.
Okay, other comments?
Someone left their phone here.
Dave, can you pick up that phone? Oh, I see.
Oh.
Okay.
My name is Jim Mosier. I'm a 30-year resident of Newport Beach and not a loud party person, but I seem to be in the minority. This item really strikes me as poorly conceived proposal, both ethically and procedurally. The idea of stigmatizing people by tagging their homes for a relatively minor offense smacks of Hester Prynne having to wear a letter A, scarlet A for adultery, or Hitler branding Jews with yellow stars. I cannot imagine that in this day of computer databases, such tagging is really necessary to identify repeat offenders. Procedurally, this adds pages and pages of text to Title 10 of our municipal code, which already has chapters condemning nearly every offense that is cited here. And it also appears to be unnecessarily duplicating passages in Title I of our code, which already spell out standard procedures for the issuance, appeal, and collection of city citations in general. Another thing that bothers me is the specification in this and also in Title I of fines using the words not exceeding, in this case $500 or $8,000, or whatever number the author has chosen. Not to exceed seems to me to cover a very large range. And although I haven't heard anything mentioned here tonight other than the maximum amounts, neither this ordinance nor Title I enlighten me as to how the amount of the fine is set in any particular case. As best as I can tell, it's left entirely to the discretion of the enforcement officer. And if there is an appeal and a hearing, it can either be set aside or ratified, but the amount cannot be altered. That seems neither fair nor sensible to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
My name is Craig Batley, and one of my positions here on the peninsula is owner of Burr White Realty. We put about 10,000 short-term rental contracts on the beach here in the last 10 years. We haven't had one DAC, we haven't had any violations at all for noise. 10,000 contracts. We rent to families only. As far as the winter rentals, many of them are students. All of our rentals are co-signed by the parents. And we have had a few DACs. And part of the enforcement process that Mr. Wozansky brought up and a few others brought up is that when an officer shows up for a party, at whatever time it might be at night, they, at their discretion, can issue a DAC, not issue a DAC, and then maybe an hour and a half later they'll come back and they'll issue another DAC. And theoretically, they can issue 3 DACs on one night. And if the police were doing their job, it would seem to me that they would shut down that party in such a way that there would not be a subsequent DAC on the same night for the same party, for the same individuals. And I would like to see, I'm in favor of this ordinance. It needs some more work, and I'd be happy to work with council or staff or police officer to maybe streamline things a little bit. There are currently 4 noise ordinances here in Newport Beach, 10.26, 10.28, 10.58, and now 10.2 and 10.66. They are duplicative in a certain sense. I don't know how an officer is going to decide if there's going to be a DAC or it's going to be this new ordinance, unruly party. 8 people or more, if it's 7 people or more, is that a DAC? If it's 9 people or more, could it be a DAC? There's a lot of leeway here for the officer on site. And I have personally been in parties that I've gone to myself, let's say at 1:30 in the morning, and there's a bunch of people there, and you don't know who is who, don't know who is renting the place, don't know who's responsible. It's very difficult to ascertain that. I think this ordinance needs a little bit more work. I wouldn't want to see it just kind of thrown together, and we're at the point now where the city is actually going to cause a situation where maybe some of these parties can be subsided. And I'd like to be a little more careful about it, make sure all the procedures are done right so that it can actually be implemented in the field. Now, my understanding is the enhancement zone is only for 27 hours. So these increased fines up to $8,000 is for 27 hours. The other fines are going to be Right now, the maximum fine is $1,000. So with the new ordinance, the maximum fine will be $3,000. And it used to be in a 12-month period, now it's going to be a 6-month period. To answer Ms. Daigle's question about the fines in Tucson, the fines, the first one is $500, second is $1,000, third is $1,500, and then it's $1,500, tops out at $1,500. The Tucson ordinance is 3 pages. It's much more simple than this one. I think the definitions of unruliness and all that needs to be streamlined a little bit so it can be actually implemented. And if the police were going to actually follow this ordinance on 4th of July, they would shut down every single party. Every single party is unruly. Every single party is going to be subject to this ordinance. There would be no parties on the 4th of July if they're going to actually enforce this. Because every other day of the year, if they have the same party that they have on 4th of July, let's say on June 4th, they shut it down. The only day they do not do that is 4th of July. And I would submit that this needs a little bit more work and a little more refinement, and I would be happy to sit down since I basically have, and our company has the most experience of pretty anybody in town.
So with regard to that, I'm sure, Craig, that you'll have the ability to do that. The people that were here today are the ones to be in touch with to get your ideas on the table for consideration. Kyle Rowan, particularly in the city attorney's office, and then Lieutenant Hartford.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Ma'am, are you stretching, or are you coming down here to talk? Okay. All right. Seeing no one else coming down for comment, I'll bring it back to council. It appears to me that we have broad consensus here on council that we want to move forward with the enactment of an ordinance, and for my purposes, I'd like to see it on April the 26th. I don't think there's any reason why we should delay here if we want to have it in effect before the summer. Councilmember Selledge?
Yeah, well, I'll just say I do have some concerns applying it citywide. We do have areas of the city where there's a demonstrated problem. There's other areas that don't have the problem. I haven't reached any conclusion on it, but I know that between now and the 26th, if that's when we have it, I plan on contacting homeowners associations and groups in my district to see how they feel about it, because I think the perception right now is that this is an ordinance that applies only to the problem areas and not the entire city.
Okay.
I would, Mr. Mayor, I would agree that, sometimes a surgical approach is better than a sledgehammer, and I think you can resolve the problem without, some sort of a wide sweeping regulation. So, and the fact is that it does occur in certain areas, and I don't think that's a stigma. That's just a geographic fact, and it should be addressed that way.
All right. I'll go to my right. Mayor Pro Tem Gardner.
Well, I just know that if I lived in an area that wasn't delineated and I had a problem, I'd be pretty ticked that I didn't have this tool. The only question I have, though, is did we want to consider making the number lower, as Mr. Schroeder had suggested, or are we happy with the 8? So that would just be...
There's a second question that Mr. Rosansky raised, too, whether to include the short-term lodging permit as being at risk in the event.
I think that's a great idea.
I think, yeah, we've got consensus on that point. That was a good suggestion. All right, Councilmember Rosansky?
I'll just reiterate, just as Nancy did, if someone has a problem, they want the protection of the law, and, if there's no problem in the port streets or somewhere else, then they don't have to worry about it. They're not going to get any red tags, and they're not going to have any notices, and if there are problems, then they will. And so I don't know why we would, I don't know, how you're going to go draw it by block. I mean, what block is in and what block is out. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I don't know that we could surgically define an area in town where we would want to enforce and not enforce. So I think it applies equally to the entire city or not at all, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Councilmember Curry.
Well, I'm generally supportive of the fact that we need an ordinance, but I agree with Mr. Patley. I think this one's not quite ready for prime time yet. On the 4th of July, where we escalate fines to $8,000, what that means is that we were ineffectual in solving somebody's problem next door. I mean, we should have shut the party down early and sent people home. not simply run up the tab for them like that. And I think that's what's drawn the media attention. And I think there's a fundamental sense of unfairness. So comparable to Tucson, I think we ought to look at the fine levels and cap them out, $1,500, $2,000, something more fair, I think would be appropriate there. I do think we need to get some input from some of the property owners so that we can work this in a practical way as it relates to people's leases, as to who's responsible, how do you find them, how do you notice them, that kind of thing, and then sort of take it from there.
Councilmember Rosansky.
Yeah, following up on Councilman Curry's comment about the fine level, I'm a little have mixed feelings on that, because I do feel that if the fine is so high, that's going to create a situation where the officers may be less likely to impose the fine, thinking, well, I'm not going to hit this guy with a $3,000 ticket. I'll just talk to him a little bit more. So I'd rather see a reasonable fine that's going to be used and going to be enforced, as opposed to how we handled DAX in the past, than to put egregious fines here and never issue a ticket. So I could be persuaded to somewhat reduce the fines with the knowledge that they're going to be enforced.
All right, well, I'll weigh in. I could not be persuaded to reduce the fines. I could be persuaded to encourage our police department to enforce the fines. It seems to me that's the right answer here, and I'll be looking for the commitment of the police department to be expressed when this comes up for action as an ordinance in that respect. And I'll further be looking for evidence that it was enforced after we have ample opportunity here. I was impressed, actually, by the balanced nature of this ordinance as it relates to property owners in terms of their ability to either get relief to start with or afterwards get relief from the more onerous provisions of this. One of the things that I think we may want to consider additionally in that respect is to provide an opportunity for property owners. I don't know if grace period is quite the right way to characterize it, but leases generally are written for one-year periods of time. Maybe some are less, maybe some are more, but it is going to take a little bit of time for property owners to have the ability to execute these remedies in their leases. So I'd be willing to consider some transitional provision in the ordinance to provide that sort of relief. But that doesn't extend to the unruly people and the people, on the premise, managing the premise, and so I'm very much in favor of this. Seems to have worked in Tucson. It's not like we're the very first municipality to move forward with something like this, and we need to have the ability to have shock and awe in this area and in other areas where we have repetitive problems and people just find the way to, blithely ignore and go on. What I like about this is it is a targeted tool, and I believe the police department will execute it in that respect. So I'm very much in favor of getting this on board as quickly as we can. I don't see a lot that needs to be changed here, frankly. So with that, unless staff has any further comments, did you get enough direction here?
Well, I'm going to be I'm going to be guessing, but I'm inclined to leave the ordinance with 8 people, add short-term lodging permit revocation, and keep the same fines. But I also want to be respectful if you think if there's a majority that thinks the fine should be lower. I just haven't quite heard that yet. So.
Well, this is not Tucson. This is Newport Beach. I think there is a difference in profile here in terms of income levels and the relative impact of fines. And so I'm fine if the fine level is higher than Tucson. I've been to Tucson.
Well, I think broad consensus is an overstatement. I see 3 people that don't really support that, maybe 4.
So let's take a straw vote.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, so on the issue of whether the fines should be reduced in the ordinance that's presented to us, we'll of course have another chance to discuss this. So if you want the fine levels reduced, raise your hand. 1.
You know I support the ordinance, so.
Well, but you're the one that asked about the consensus on the fine level. So did you want to express it?
Indicated there was broad consensus on the ordinance, and I'm just simply stating that's not what the manager heard or anybody else.
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about the fine levels. Then let's get a straw vote on whether the ordinance should be brought back. All those in favor of bringing back an ordinance on the 26th, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5, 2.
On the 26th part, there may need to be a little bit more community involved.
Bring back an ordinance.
Bring back an ordinance. Okay.
As rapidly as feasible.
How about quickly on 5 versus 8? 8 seem reasonable?
I'm okay with 8.
And then on the fine question, I guess I did hear that keep the fines as is. Okay? All right. Questions, David? Otherwise, ready to go? Okay. Chief? Good? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Good discussion. Okay, we're ready for our next agenda item, which would be direction on issues. We're going to have a lot of fun today. So,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. So this is, consider this 5 random items, but an attempt before staff spent much more work on any of the 5. I am giving this a first attempt to, I may never come back with you again if it doesn't work, but to kind of give an up or down on should we spend more time on one of the items is a proposed proposed ban on smoking in parks and open space areas. That comes out of EQUAC. B would be a pilot parking program in Corona Del Mar, and this is, Councilmember Gardner can speak more about it if she wishes. Third was a ban on plastic bags that kind of didn't quite get out of EQUAC, but we just rose high enough where I thought we should ask you more about it. Fourth would be a review of our business license regulations, knowing that the former EDC committee had a subcommittee that worked on this, and they're often working on it, probably in very good spirit and enthusiasm. I wanted to make sure it was something you wanted us to allocate some time to. And then finally, the ever-present water taxi program. So we can have a brief discussion or a presentation about each one of those items. I guess if I had my druthers, you'd talk about them in that order. And if you needed something with greater explanation, we can provide that to you. If you did not, a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And I'd probably encourage you to invite the public to comment on any of those before, obviously, you did that.
all right. I'm happy to take them one at a time. I think otherwise it'll get very confusing. And so let's talk about the smoking ban in public parks and open spaces. And this drove out of discussion at EQUAC. Mayor Pro Tem Gardner.
They did quite a lot of research on the issue to see what was being done in other cities, and looked at it in a very comprehensive fashion, from should we just ban all smoking in the city, a la, say, a Santa Monica, or should we be very tailored? And EQUAC came back with this tailored approach, saying it was probably better to do it incrementally, and that the parks and open space areas, and we have, they were identified, were a natural extension after our banning of smoking on public beaches. So at least what I've gotten has been support in terms of email from residents.
Okay, other comments from council on this one? Councilmember Curry.
Well, about 13% of Californians currently smoke. I would support additional restrictions in our parks and open space, not in restaurants, not in office areas or commercial areas, but in parks and open space, I'm okay with additional restrictions. I think it's appropriate.
I would support that as well.
All right. Councilmember Selledge?
Well, I supported the ban on the beaches primarily because of the trash and litter problem. I haven't observed any trash or litter problem in the parks, so I don't think I'd be in support of it.
I can't see. Councilmember Hill.
Next to leaf blowers.
Which you hate.
Electric cigarettes.
Yeah. I actually do not appreciate anybody smoking around me. But I do differentiate between smoking indoors and smoking outdoors. And I refuse to go into a restaurant in any state that I'm in where there's smoking around it. But I have never personally, anyway, been bothered, nor actually have I seen smoking in the parks where the youth soccer games are going on and these types of things. So I would think very carefully on this one as just over-regulation.
I take it that means you would prefer not to go forward with this? Is that...
Given the priorities that we have, I'm not certain this is worthy of staff time at this point.
Okay.
Well, I know thank you, the Upper Bay came up as one of those environments, and, I mean, people just are not close together there, so the whole premise that we're endangering people's health, I don't think that holds water. So I just see that we have other priorities here than coming up with regulations that I don't see have a practical impact, certainly in that environment. And I think at the end of the day, it becomes more about people trying to control other people's behavior than legitimate health impacts.
Okay. Any other comments from council? All right, I'll speak for myself. I do come down generally in favor of this idea. I'd like to see it come back. I'm concerned not just with litter, but we're talking about trails and open space areas. I do think there's a certain amount of hazard to be concerned about, too, with some of these areas that have been identified. And so I think it's worthwhile to have a look at it at council. But having said that, I would like to get public comment on this issue, and then we'll bring it back for a straw vote.
My name is Jim Mosier. I just wanted to reiterate what the mayor said there. I don't know about the secondhand smoke issue, but the 3 open space areas that are cited on the staff report are all areas of extreme fire danger and areas that are very poorly situated for fighting a fire if one started there. And I'm actually astounded that smoking is not already prohibited in those areas during the dry parts of the year for that reason. Thank you.
Okay. Other comment?
Nancy Skinner, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to support this idea of going ahead with no smoking in the open space and in parks. And it isn't really for the fact that it's a health issue. It's an annoyance issue for me. Sometimes I'm walking out of the CVS drugstore, and some of the employees, I think, are sitting out there smoking, and you have to walk by it. And it's very annoying. And so I think for that reason, if nothing else, it would certainly be nice to have the beauty of an open space location and the park not having to have the intrusion from somebody else's habit. And I'm not trying to change their habit. I'm just trying to make it nicer for me.
But it wouldn't apply to CVS pharmacy.
I know. That's not yet, though. Huh? No, I don't think it probably ever will. But I just feel very strongly that this is something that the time is right, the time has come. Thank you.
Other comment from the public? Okay, bring it back to council for any further comments. Is there any further? Let's take a straw vote. Those in favor of moving forward with staff time on this, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that enough direction?
It is, thank you.
City manager, okay.
The next item, I'll ask actually Mayor Pro Tem Gardner to discuss this a little bit.
We did a parking study several years ago in Corona del Mar, and the end result of the study was to say, we don't have a lack of parking spaces, we just have them very poorly organized. And the critical area as far as residents were concerned, where they were feeling an impact, was in the area between Avocado and Heliotrope, because they were getting so many employees parking there, so many customers parking there from the restaurants. And so they wanted a metered permit parking. And then we asked the businesses, and they thought metered parking was great, because with meters, you take your time. If you've got customers who come for 15 minutes, they can put in a quarter. If you've got a customer who stays for 2 hours, they can put in that amount. And you don't have one size fits all. When we brought this to the council, a request to do a pilot program that combined both these elements, the reaction was, and I think I'm quoting, this looks like a solution looking for a problem. But, wasn't that you? I have a long memory for some of these things.
Sounds like something Russia would say.
Actually, I think he said it.
Huh?
Yeah. But the council did say they would look at it in terms of if we had some dollars attached to it. We got bumped. We spent some time on the Balboa Peninsula parking issues and everything. And what I would just like is either, let's get some more information and really look at going forward, or no, this is something the council is absolutely not interested in. We know we're not going to spend any money on it, so I can go back to the residents and we can decide what else we might do in terms of their problems. So that's why this has come back. And to do it with the, I know staff is not eager to do it because they don't like permits. They don't like dealing with that. It's a hassle. And there would be some expense because meters, we put in parking meters, and they're not cheap.
Councilman Selich?
Would this be something we'd do in conjunction with the revitalization committee like we're doing the squeeze lane, or would it be something separate? Or
Well, this was proposed several years ago, so it really wasn't, but it could be. But one thing we want to do is, would this help the residents in terms of having some parking and not having the employees parking there all day and all night and not having as many customers. The businesses were fine with that. We would have a 2-hour limit on the residential street. You could park, if you were a customer, you could park for 2 hours. The businesses were fine with that because, as I think it was Jim Walker of the bungalow said, hey, I want some turnover, so I don't want them staying any longer than that, and preferably like them out earlier. So there was a lot of support for it at the business and residential level. There was not, as I say, being very honest, not tremendous support at the council level.
So that was going to be my question. Is there support from the community for moving forward for something like this? And if you believe that there is, then that sways me a lot here in terms of how
Well, we have one member I know who is very much not in favor of it, has characterized it as a land grab by the city. But this plan for permit parking came out of 4, I think it was Karen, was it 4? 4 community meetings that we had. Now, obviously, it wasn't everybody. We weren't mailing addresses out. We were putting notices in. But we had a number of meetings, and this is where the idea generated. It wasn't something that came from staff, and it wasn't actually the permits wasn't something that came from the bid, but from this group of residents.
I believe it's also based on a recommendation from a consultant that looked at the issue.
The consultant, well, consultants nowadays, if you remember all of our parking studies, they're all for getting revenue out of parking. And so they were very much in favor. They wanted to meter the whole thing. Well, we'd already had a bad experience with meters, and the last thing we wanted to do was meter from Avocado to Hazel and then say a year later, oh, we didn't like it. But we thought if we could meter a few blocks and test it, that would be a good first step.
Other comment from council? Councilman Rosansky, did you press your button? Okay. I can't see your button there, Councilmember Hill. Councilmember
That's because Councilmember Rosansky tries to prohibit me from speaking. I would support taking a look at this, and I think it may be part of the revitalization. The only thing that we've talked about with respect to Kona Damara and revitalization at this point is the entrance area to the village at MacArthur and PCH, and I think this could easily be added to that to be taken a look at and put within the priorities. And in my research on it, it has had community support from the area by majority.
Okay, let's hear from the public on this. Anyone from the public wish to comment on this issue?
Karen Tringali, Cronin Del Mar. Just a comment about just one sentence that's in the staff report. It has to do with the 2 blocks off of Coast Highway. The first 2 residential blocks perpendicular to PCH would not be metered, but would be enforced with 2-hour parking limitations. We're currently not really enforcing the 2-hour parking limitation on Coast Highway today. So I think we need to be very careful if we do put meters on Coast Highway that we implement a significant enforcement for those residents that live on those streets.
We did. We met with parking enforcement, and we have to be very candid. Parking enforcement is spotty all over the city because we only have so many people. But what we do often is go to an area and really do tremendous enforcement to get the message out, and then you go to another area and you come back.
That may well
That
change
later.
soon with the change in parking administration.
Although that there are no meters over there, they're looking for where the money is, so that's points well taken.
Any other comment on this from the public?
Dan Purcell, Corona Del Mar. I think this is an absolutely horrible idea, and I think this rakes up with doing the coastal freeway through town, a number of years ago that people got up in arms and fought about. And I live in Corona Del Mar, and I'm very active in the community. I'm out and about, and all this slipped past me, and you basically have to go to the residents' board meetings, which very few people show up to actually provide input. I see this as a handout to commercial property owners and businesses in town. We're not the kind of community where we're, as residents, super dependent on income of those retail establishments along Coast Highway. Hundreds of millions of dollars flow into the community through the residents. And there's plenty of vitality. There's people out walking around, with their dogs, and neighborhood saying hi, people riding their bicycles and doing things. And it just seems like so often vitality means restaurants and, wine and beer and liquor, and I see that's what's expanding. I'm supportive of condensing the highway there at across from the Irvine Company property there and condensing that to 2 lanes, but I think giving all of that space to all the businesses is just asking for trouble. Anywhere I've ever lived where you have all those meters and everything, it's just a hassle. And finally, real quick, last time, the parking thing came up at the last meeting, and I thought, well, maybe I won't comment on it, this outsourced vendor, parking group, because it really doesn't affect my area. Well, I'm glad I did, because now all of a sudden you do want to do it in Corona Del Mar. And this surcharge, this 35-cent surcharge or 32 cents or whatever it is, every time we use our phone to pay, which is the most convenient and efficient way to do it, before we even start paying our meter, we're already, charged 35 cents or something. So I am totally opposed to this. It's the biggest issue that I've come across in the years that I've lived here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. I do want to emphasize this is just a study session. There's no action being taken here, and you'll have plenty of opportunity when it does, if it does come back for action, to register your comments at that time, too. Any other comment on this item? Seeing none, let's bring it back to council. Councilman Rosansky?
Yeah, I guess maybe I did say as a solution looking for a problem. I mean, I see a number of problems. I see issues with just pushing the employees further back into the neighborhood, so now you have walking 3 blocks instead of 2 blocks. I see other areas of town wanting the same thing. I mean, I live in Newport Shores, and there's several successful restaurants, and their employees are all parking in the first block or whatever, but there's no place else for them to go. So if they can't park there, they're going to just park further back, and it's just going to push the problem onto other people. It's pushing the problem around and not really dealing with the problem. The problem needs, parking lots and parking structures where people can park, and that's always been the problem in Corona Del Mar, is that we just don't have enough parking, I guess, in the right places. So I'm not in favor of this. I think we need to look to other solutions.
Councilmember Curry.
Well, I share those views. I may have just joined him or said the same thing back when we talked about this the first time. But, the way to deal with parking, I think, in Corona Del Mar is in the context of what the Neighborhood Revitalization Committee comes up with in terms of how we're going to deal with streetscapes and how we're going to deal with land use and densities. And parking should be considered in that context as opposed to sort of a standalone one-off thing. I don't personally necessarily have a problem with neighborhood permits, but in the wrong sequence here as we try and revitalize the entire neighborhood.
Councilmember Gardner?
If there isn't support, can I ask that this be included in the revitalization aspects of it? Because, I guess I would need to know, because I don't want to just go back to the residents and say, okay, well, we brought it up, it failed, and that's it. I don't know whether then I should initiate further community meetings or whether this is something, as I say, that could be part of the revitalization aspect and ask them to participate through that. if there's no support for a pilot program.
Well, let's take it, excuse me, Councilmember Selich.
Yeah, well, I would be in support of it as part of the revitalization program, to take a look at it. I know that, the BID and the residents associations have looked into it, and there's support for exploring it, so I would support it from that direction. I'm just not sure that we'll ever find a workable solution to the parking problems in Corona Del Mar, both real and perceived. I think there are perceived problems that don't necessarily exist, and there are real problems, but it's such a unique area and configuration, and the way the commercial interfaces with the residential and that long, skinny necklace type of configuration. I don't know how we're ever going to provide equitable parking there, but I'd certainly support taking a look at it as part of our revitalization program.
Okay, well, from my perspective, I do recall from that study that one of the surprising conclusions of Walker parking was that there probably generally in total is not that much of a shortage of parking in Corona Del Mar. It's an issue of where the available parking is. That's the issue. And I think that's worth having a look at to see if there's possible solutions. And so I'm happy to do that as part of the Revitalization Committee agenda. I do see a lot of nodding heads there.
All right, well, and that's fine. That I will just, through the Residents Association and people who've been contacting me on parking, we'll let them know that this will be where their efforts should be focused, and I'll help them in any way I can, even though I'm not on that committee.
And for the benefit of the residents, that committee, one of the first things it has to do is decide, in what order and when it's going to attack the various issues, and so it'll have to get laid into a program in that respect. But council will actually have the opportunity to comment on that, too, so it should be fine. All right, next item.
Ban on plastic bags.
Yes.
Maybe
I don't
more information
recollect
about it.
actually a lot of discussion at EQUAC about plastic bags. I'm not quite sure where this came from. Does anybody on
I'll
council?
just say I'm not really in favor of that. Let's just move this along. I
Yeah.
don't know that we're going to have a lot of discussion
I
on
think
that.
that one would, and I wouldn't want to shy or duck away from any debate or battle, but this one would be a doozy, I think, and, we even potentially expose the city to litigation.
Yeah, frankly, I don't have any enthusiasm for it either.
I vote no.
So it appears that it's unanimous.
Public
Is that
comment,
good?
maybe?
Yeah,
It is good, I appreciate it.
That's good guidance, isn't it? Yes, we will have public comment on this item. Does anyone care to comment on this item?
I'd like to go against the wind and say I'd like to see it. I think it's a great idea. It took me a while, but I finally got started with through Trader Joe's bags that you get there. You can just function just fine with carry your own bags the way they do in Europe, and I think it's another one of those, the time is right and the time to come. So I would certainly hope that if you're not going to do it this time and the next time it comes around, I hope you will give some thought to that. I think it's important for the critters in the ocean. As you know, plastic gets in the ocean and it doesn't get out, and the turtles think there's something else that they're eating, and they consume it, so that's kind of a concern too. Thank you very much.
Okay, any further comment?
Pretty clear, thank you. Oh, sorry.
I think we should not take them, make it so people can't have the bags, but to increase maybe fines for littering with the plastic bag would make sense, so they're not ending up in the ocean, because I think that's probably the main point of not having the plastic bag, not just not having them at all.
May I have your name, please?
Yes, Michael Parker.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comment? I guess I would say I do recycle my grocery bags in conjunction with walking the dog virtually every day. So, okay. All right, I think guidance is clear on that one. Can we move on to the next?
Yes, the fourth one involves the EDC, and their subcommittees look at business license regulation and structure review. So they have some work underway. You have something from Mr. Hawkins as a handout where he's kind of explaining what has been going on.
Councilmember Hill?
I have a question on this one. Aren't we looking at a consultant to do some economic development review that would be looking at this as well?
No, we could certainly add that to, if we haven't been fully clear, we could add if the thought is, do our business license regulations somehow inhibit business activity here, yeah, I think that's a really good thing for her to look at.
Then I would be in favor of assigning that to the consultant to deal with. That would then, I think, eventually end up back at the council.
Councilmember Selledge?
Well, I think a lot of the idea, I don't think it had anything to do with economics, Councilman Hill. I think a lot of it had to do with just getting rid of taxing entities that aren't really businesses, but because of the way they're held and they get reported to the state, that they come back through our revenue department and end up getting taxed. For example, someone who forms an LLC to hold a boat and ownership between 4 persons. Families that own a family partnership and own property in the desert or something, and they file a tax return through an LLC, and they're not making, it's not a business, it's just a way of holding property, and we go back and tax them. And then a lot of times they're able to get out of it by going through an appeal and administrative hearing process, but why put them through all of that? I think that was a lot of the thinking that was going into this.
Actually, there was some additional thinking. It had to do with special events and permitting for attendees. Right. That did have some impact. So, Councilmember
And we
Curtis.
did make some, EDC did make some recommendations in that regard that I think were well received that will help address that problem there. But to Councilman Selledge's issue, I mean, I think he's absolutely right. We cast the net pretty broad and deep with our business license, and there are certain real estate professionals, LLCs, family corporations, people that, you know, by no definition of the term do business in Newport Beach, who get caught up in it. And we need to have some way of rationalizing and reviewing that here in the city structure, in my opinion.
Other comment?
Well, I'd just say I'm in favor of moving ahead, and we've been talking about this for a couple of years and doing something about it.
All right. Comment from the public on this item? Okay. Bring it back to council. Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, I would just say for all those reasons mentioned, we should move forward. And then, you know, given that our consultant has experience in other cities, you know, if she sees any other sorts of red flags that we might improve our practices, I'd be open to learning about that too.
Do we have general consensus on that one? Okay. Is that enough guidance?
It is, thank you.
All right.
Last one is the water taxi program. And I note that this is assigned in a way to the Tidelands Management Committee. It's kind of in a catch-all, but I didn't want to limit it to that if you felt strongly that we should either leave it there or bring it back in another way. And I think staff is struggling a bit with this one because we still think whatever we might propose, we're not sure that the council would ever provide a subsidy, and why the market isn't doing this on its own. So part of, I think there's a sense amongst staff, certainly with me, that we're not quite sure if we want to even spend any more time on this, except to say, you know, if anybody wants to submit a proposal to us, we're happy to look at it. But we haven't, Councilmember Selledge, anticipating your question about franchises, we haven't quite looked at, but could briefly look at whether or not it needs a franchise like the Beak Ferry does, the Balboa Island Ferry.
You read the other part of my mind.
Was that your question?
No. Actually, I was just going to almost restate what you stated, Dave, that I thought that we had pretty well left the door open for anybody that wanted to come in with a proposal.
Right.
And had already pretty much made this determination that we didn't want to provide a subsidy.
Yeah, that was my feeling, too.
If that's the sense, that helps.
All right. I guess my view of it is that if we do find one or two people that come forward and want to make a proposal, that's something that the Tidelands Management Committee probably ought to have a look at. Although I'd want to get the opinion of the Harbor Commission as well about that. And so I guess we'll just leave it open as to whether or not there is a reason, if a reason arises for us to consider it that's non-subsidized. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Good evening. My name is Jim Mahoney. I have the gondola service over here in Lido Village, and we do run water taxi service. It's on an on-call basis to transport people on the water. You need a Coast Guard license. Operators, and you need a boat that to carry more than 6 people has to be certified by the Coast Guard, and we have both over there. But to do water taxi service on a regular scheduled basis, to go from Lido Village, say, to the Balboa Fun Zone, it's so expensive, we're losing money. So to have something like that, it would have to be subsidized. Other than that, we're still doing it on an on-call basis, and if anybody wants information on my experience, I'm right across the street.
Jim, why don't you say the name of your company again, just so folks at home might be able to follow up?
Gondola Company of Newport and Gondola Romance. Thank you.
Okay, good product placement.
Yeah, well, I can say that I've used Jim's services, and I'm now married.
I've used them, and I'm still married.
Good afternoon. My name is Chandler Bell. I am chair of the Marine Committee. Regarding the water taxi, I think it should be considered with the Tidelands and also the revitalization committees. I don't believe that anybody right now would consider going on their own without subsidy unless they understand what might be available to them going forward in regards to docks that maybe become available through the revitalization and also the Tidelands. So I think it should go forward and be involved in those committees. And until that point, I don't believe anybody would, in their right mind, do this at this time without subsidy. But thank you.
Okay. Further comment? All right. Is the direction clear here?
Yes.
Okay. That's the last item in this section.
Mayor?
So, yes.
Yeah, before we leave this topic, I just want to make a comment because I know both you and Councilman Selich in the past have asked staff to focus on some of the stuff that gets accumulated in our ordinances and city charter and in statutes that probably doesn't need to be there anymore. And I think we need to sort of go back and revisit not only ways that we can be more regulatory here in the city, and I supported some and opposed some of those others, but also ways that we can sort of eliminate rules and laws that don't make any sense. The going out of business fee comes to mind, and some of the other things that I think there was a list that was circulated. I'd like to see us also be focused on how we can streamline the government and get rid of some things as opposed to also always adding them in.
Okay. Animal shelter services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I think you'll be pleased to hear this next presentation made by Lieutenant Kudelka and Rob Houston, assistant to the city manager. We're going to tell you about the current animal shelter services, about an RFP that went out, responses to it, with the expectation that we'd bring back to you a proposed contract at a nighttime study session coming up here, but not tonight. So with that, Rob.
Thanks, Dave. Council members, Mayor, before you have a discussion about animal sheltering, the program and the process that we've gone through recently to look at requests for proposals and accepting proposals to keep our sheltering program working forward in the future. And I just wanted to let you know that it's been a 4-month process, or more actually, with the police department taking the lead. It's been an interesting project for myself to be involved with, and I've really wanted to credit the hard work put in by a number of staff, including Lieutenant Kudelka and his animal control officers, especially Valerie and Mike, Hortensia and Anthony from our purchasing and revenue groups, and advocates in the community that we've consulted to help make this plan go forward. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Lieutenant Kudelka to guide us through the first part of this discussion.
Thank you, Rob. Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you. Thank you. First of all, the introduction to the animal sheltering program. The City of Newport Beach has actually been providing animal control service for its residents since 1948. And the city has been contracting with the Dover Shores Pet Care for veterinary and sheltering service since March of 1991. There are two mandates that require us to actually have some sort of animal control program within the city. The first one is 121690, E-ECHO, the Health and Safety Code section, which basically says that the city and or the county has to have a pound system and rabies control program in place. And more recently, 42 U.S.C. 5196B, this happened after Katrina, where we have to have a program in place for rescuing animals in cases of a civic emergency. And that section also allows the city to request reimbursement through FEMA in case we do have a declared emergency. The sheltering services that the shelter provides for us now is receiving lost and stray animals, providing vet services for injured animals, housing animal control impounded animals. They assist us with adoption services, rescue organizations, and placement of homeless animals, the safe containment and return of lost or stray animals to their owners. And all these services are done in partnership and conjunction with the city's animal control program, which is with the police department. Our current shelter is Dover Shores Pet Care, and it's located at 2075 Newport Boulevard in the city of Costa Mesa. And the last negotiated contract with Dover Shores was signed in May of 2001. The current budget for these services is $99,745. Dover Shores Pet Care gave the city notice in December 2010 requesting termination of the current contract to be effective April 30th of 2011.
So that brings us to the process of the contracting process that we've undergone. As was mentioned by Lieutenant Kadolko, we had a contract in place for the last 20 years until notice was recently given. So we hadn't been in the business, police department or any of us, in putting together a sheltering contract for a long time. So we really spent a lot of effort to try to get this right. Looked at the knowledge of staff, but then also looked to advocate groups and engaged citizens that we have in Newport to get their input. We really took into case when we were building the RFP request for proposal at the philosophy of Newport Beach. We have people in this city that care a lot about animals, and that philosophy was taken into account when we looked at the service levels of our current shelter, which is very high, and any future provider. So that was part of our proposal. As part of that, the euthanasia rates that occur at shelters can be fairly high, but again, that philosophy really plays out in the low rates that our current shelter have had. A lot of that is due to the partnerships with rescue groups and community members that help keep that down. So the proposal, we really spelt out that that was necessary to keep those rates low. Also, any potential provider would need to have a good ability to allow volunteers in the community to stay involved and help out, because this is really a community venture. It's not just the city, it's a group effort. And then location. Animal control officers as well as police officers on off hours are involved in transporting animals to and from shelters. And so the distance that this shelter is located can't be too far away from the city to pull these officers out. They are sometimes at these shelters 2 or 3 times a day. So when we looked at the proposals, those were the general criteria. We then put the proposal out for bid, received responses, initially 2 responses, but we sent it out to over 20 groups. We heard immediately after the bids closed that there was 2 additional groups that meant to put in a proposal, and where somehow there was a snafu in emails and they didn't receive notice. So we worked with our purchasing department and extended the bid for an extra 3 days, notified everyone in the group that could have proposed that they still had time to propose, notified the 2 proponents, made sure we covered all our bases there, and then ended up receiving a total of 4 proposals. The 4 groups were Orange County Animal Control Service, our current shelter, Dover Shores, the Back Bay Veterinary Group, as well as Orange County Humane Society. Those 4 proposals we started reviewing. In the middle of that review process, the Back Bay Group decided that they would like to withdraw their proposal as they didn't feel like they could provide the service after all. So we reviewed and scored the top 3 proposals using this criteria of the philosophy, the operation, history, the low euthanasia rates, the involvement of the community, and the location, as well, of course, as price, and came up with a most responsive proposal, which we are recommending, but wanted to give you a little more detail on now. Lieutenant Kadolko.
The group that we selected after the RFP selection was the Orange County Humane Society, which is located off of Newland Street in Huntington Beach. Its close proximity to the city limits assists our animal control officers and police officers in getting back to the city as quickly as possible. It's a newly remodeled facility. It allows the city and our animal control folks to maintain control over the animals that we bring to that shelter to ensure that we continue to have a small euthanasia rate. It's a nonprofit society. Allows shelter and vet services at one location. And at this time, we determined that it's a good fit for the city's needs. The society will provide services involving our animal control folks at every step, the adoption assistance. They'll also accept volunteers, accept donations. We'll assist in the rescue and placement of all the homeless animals, all vet and boarding services. We also have the ability to have 24-hour access for PD staff. And again, they've discussed the agreed to the low euthanization rates. And that would be the end of our presentation.
Just wanted to also let council know we do have a Debbie Gonzalez, who's the manager of the Orange County Humane Society, available if you had any questions, as well as staff on this matter.
Okay, Councilman Daigle.
Yes, if I'm reading this correctly, the current shelter is Dover Shores, which I've heard a lot of really good things about. Their proposal was $971,000, and then the one you're recommending was $103,000. I mean, that's quite a difference. Is what services are not being, are the services not being provided?
Yes, it is. It was interesting. The high level of the bid price was the current shelter's annual cost is in the $110,000 to $120,000 price, Dover Shores, but he had complained that he needed more funds for the service. The proposal that he provided in the latest proposal, over $900,000, didn't propose any additional services. It just really had a large boarding rate, daily rate, that when you calculate it over the amount of animals that we board and the number of days, it really spiked that number to a very high number. We didn't feel in reviewing the proposals that the other proposals had any less levels of service. Just the cost, for some reason, was remarkably higher.
And what is the euthanism rate? I mean, when does that kick in for each of these proposals?
Well, the one qualifier we have is our current shelter has a rate of around 9% the last several years. Part of that is the operations of the shelter, but a big component of that is the partnerships that we have with many of our community members. And so we have rescue groups and residents who come in there and swoop out animals that are likely to be euthanized before that happens. And the partnership works really well. We've spoken to many of these advocates that work with our current shelter, and they want to continue the partnership if we were to move to another provider. So Orange County Humane Society, for instance, their current euthanasia rate is a little over 20, I think 28%, 30, which is a much higher. However, we've done calculations to account for this partnership from these other residents, and if they pull the same number of animals and the rescue group pulls the same number of animals out of the new shelter as the current one, the rates will drop to the near 10%, very, very similar rate.
Okay. But what's been represented to us is that the entity that you're recommending has over 3 times the euthanism rate than what we're currently doing?
Correct. We wanted to be open with the fact that that's their registered rate. Ms. Gonzalez could explain some of the differences there. The other communities that they represent don't have that great, as many engaged citizens that help. Newport has a lot of resources and community members that will jump in to much higher rates. So we did a blended rate to assume that we'd get that partnership going forward.
And you indicated this is a recommended proposal. Will you be coming back to the council at an evening item, agenda item?
Correct. This is a proposal for discussion, and then the ideal plan would be we would come back on the 26th with the actual contract for council's approval.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rosansky?
Yeah, I have several questions. First of all, what's the adoption fee at this new shelter?
The adoption fees are set on a standard, but we could get some assistance on the actual fee levels. This is Debbie Gonzalez from the Orange County Humane Society.
Hi, thank you, Council. Our adoption fees are anywhere from $65 to $150, depending on the breed and type of the animal, which includes to the public the spay and neuter of the animal, microchipping, year's worth of vaccinations, a month of pet insurance, and veterinary exam, as well as microchip.
Yeah, and that's a great deal, actually. That's a lot of services for a small amount of
so
money.
for our puppies, which require additional shots, they're $150. The next is the adult dogs, which are $130, Our kittens are 110 because they also require additional shots. Our adult cats are 90, and our breeds like pit bulls, our bully breeds that require training, we actually require mandatory training with them, so we discount their fees down to 65 so that they can pay for that additional training right at the time of adoption.
And don't leave. I'm sure there'll be other questions. So explain a little bit about your procedure there, because I'm going to get to the euthanasia rate eventually. So, we're going to drop off animals there. I believe the state law requires you to hold them for 5 days, at least, for the owner to claim them.
Yeah, for stray animals, it's 5 days. If it's an owner relinquished animal, then it would be 3 days.
Okay, so after 5 days or 3 days, as the case may be, what happens at the shelter?
At that point, we would the animal. We would put it up for evaluation for health, behavior, temperament, and at that point, we would decide if it was adoptable.
Okay, and assuming it's adoptable, then what would you do?
Gets vaccinated and moves out into a public ward where the public can view it for adoption.
Okay, and so what's the percentage there that move on to that second level or stage?
Well, like I said, he said, the euthanasia rate's 28%, so the other 70% are going up for adoption.
And they'll be held until they're adopted, or will they?
Yeah, we do not euthanize for space. So we only euthanize it for if they're a health and safety hazard or if they have a behavior or temperament problem.
Okay, what about an injured animal? I noticed that there's certain fees here for non-medical or non-emergency medical treatment, so what would that entail?
Any animal that Newport Beach would bring in that was injured would immediately be stabilized. So if it had a broken leg, it would be made comfortable, and we would hold it for the period to see if an owner was going to come. If an owner didn't come, at that point, we would decide, what I talked to the contracting about was we would decide if we were going to treat the animal, which would include x-rays, splints, stuff like that. We don't do that before the hold period's up unless we're going to have the owner pay for it. So at that hold period, as long as the doctors recommend that it's, can be treated, then we treat it.
So if the animal can be treated, you will treat it?
Yes.
But a determination is made as to, well, if they're so far gone that you can't treat it?
Then the doctor would make that determination.
All right. I understand from Rob that you're willing to cooperate, obviously, with, you do, I'm sure, cooperate with volunteers currently, I would imagine. What kind of volunteer program do you have there?
We currently have a dog walking program 7 days a week. We have volunteers from the city of Newport Beach. I know that we have several there. They come walk the dogs. They go out on 20-minute walks twice a day. We also have a cat cuddling program where they come and they can provide the brushing and cuddling services for the cats, making them more adoptable because they are kept just in the cages, and so the cat that's most likely to jump in a new owner's arm and cuddle is the one that's going to go home quickest, not the ones that want to run around. So we have that program. We also have a youth program where we work with high schools, and we have high school clubs that come out. We work with, I forget the name of the club at the Newport Beach High School here, but we work with them as well. So we have several different volunteer opportunities.
And how many staffers do you have and veterinarians do you have?
We're pretty small. We only have about 5 adoption counselors, 4 kennel attendants, and myself, the shelter manager, as well as 3 veterinarians.
And what kind of hours do you have for adoption there?
7 days a week. Monday through Friday, we're open 10 to 6, and Saturday and Sunday, we're open 9 to 5.
All right. Getting back to the volunteers and the euthanasia rate, because 30% would be a significant jump from where we are now. And let's assume for the sake of argument that the kind and generous people that have been helping out at the animal shelter here are either unwilling or unable or for whatever reason not going to go to your shelter. Are there other opportunities where the city could attain a lower or have a lower euthanasia rate?
Well, what the 28% is accounting for is mainly feral cats. That's where we get skewed. That's where it's thrown off. We put down all feral cats right now. So Newport Beach, I understand, transfers out all of their feral cats to rescue organizations, or we talked about the possibility of some people who might find a cat on their property and are willing to keep it and doing a trap, neuter, and release, where they would bring it to our facility, we would neuter it for you, and then you could release it back on that owner's property. The other cities we work with do not allow feral cats, the trap, neuter, release, and they also do not transfer out all their ferals. They all get put to sleep.
think that's all the questions I had. You can sit down if you want. Just to answer your question, Leslie, about the difference, I had a long conversation with Dr. Bowersfeld when this contract issue first came up, and, you know, I'm going to be there tomorrow, filming Pick-a-Peck.
But you're the Pick-a-Peck guy.
I'm the Pick-a-Peck guy. I've filmed at least 100 shows there by now, so I've made at least 100 visits to the animal shelter. And, you know, he does provide a high level of care there. I think that they genuinely want to adopt out the animals if they can. There are, I know, a couple of the volunteers that do go there and pick up animals that they, for whatever reason, or maybe euthanize, or they feel they're going to be euthanized and take them home. I think Dr. Bowersfeld, unfortunately, had an unreasonable idea of what the value of the service he was providing, and, you know, he was literally going to charge boarding fees that I wouldn't pay for my own pet, let alone, you know, a stray animal. So it you know, clearly that's not going to be a viable choice going forward. You know, I have yet to visit the shelter. I meant to last week, and unfortunately I misscheduled that, but I do intend to go there before we let the contract. I would encourage all of you to go there, because I think it's an important issue to our residents, and it's one of those kind of hot-button things that if it's handled wrong. And actually, could you come back up? There's one other thing I'd like you to address. I understand in the past that you did have some issues with the community with regard to your shelter, and I understand you've gone and, you know, rehabilitated the shelter. Can you touch on that briefly?
I can briefly touch on that. I wasn't there during that period of time. It was probably about 10 years ago, where I know there was some protesting, volunteer protesting going on. But since then, the shelter has completely been remodeled, rebuilt. There's new management.
Do you have any certifications from national agencies or things like that?
I do. Every year we do American Humane Society certifications and Humane Society of the United States certifications. So.
And how much of your budget is the fees and the contract fees and I guess the adoption fees, and how much of it is contributions?
All of our operating expenses are contract fees. So anything that we're putting, the donations are all put through to the care of the animals directly.
But I guess if your budget was $100, what percentage, how many dollars are from volunteers, and how much comes from actual revenue that you receive? How dependent are you on contributions to run the shelter, I guess?
Probably about 30 to 40%.
30 to 40%. Okay, I guess my last question is, you're going to let us film Pick-a-Peck there?
Oh, we'd love it. We'd love it. You know, we've done a few different, you know, Pet of the Week, and we love that. We're always in the Independent.
Actually, I did see one of your pets in the paper the other day.
Yeah, we do the Independent every week.
Yeah. So anyway, getting back to it, there was, you know, he did have an unrealistic expectation of what, you know, the city was going to pay, and it's unfortunate that we have to move out of his facility, but, you know, barring some weird thing over there, I would imagine that this will be a suitable alternative.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Leslie? All right. Any other comment from council? So let's hear from the public on this issue. Anyone wishing to comment?
Hi, my name is Caroline Samus, and I work with the PetSmart animal, or the kitty adoptions. And I really wasn't going to speak today, but I've heard some things that I kind of disagree with. First of all, the shelter that we have right now, I actually adopted one of my cats from there, but and I go in there all the time. But it, compared to other shelters that I've seen all across the country, and I've seen a lot, it is really subpar. It is way below the standard that I have seen. And if you think, I don't know if he's here or whatever, if you think that this guy is doing such a great job, I really encourage you to go in there and look. I mean, the cats, they're in a dark cages. There's never any toys or fresh toys there. It's just really unbelievable that Newport Beach, being such a, you know, wealthy city, has put up with this. And I think that a lot of people would feel the same way I do. I do think, though, that going to the Humane Society will be a step up from there. But as far as the remodeling, I actually got 3 of my kitties from there. But as far as the remodeling, I mean, I take my cats to the vet there, and the picture that you showed you of the remodeling was the remodeling for the vet clinic, not for the adoption services. And right now, the cats are like a yard away from barking dogs. They're in smaller cages. They're in a dark room. And anyway, I think that we could do a lot better. I mean, I know right now we have to have a temporary solution, but I think the ideal thing is for Newport Beach to get their own shelter. I mean, not to mention that Costa Mesa and Westminster, they're going to have to cram into the new, to the Orange County Humane Society as well. I think that there's a lot of people there that would have some issues with Newport Beach coming in. And they are cramped. I mean, I go there all the time, which is why I probably have so many cats. But anyway, I do think we can do a lot better. I talked to many, many people who are willing to, look into getting our own Newport Beach shelter. Hopefully no kill, but I understand. I don't want to be a nutbag. But anyway, so I've talked to, like I said, lots of people. There's interest about fundraising for a new shelter. And I think, actually the city might want to help with that a little bit. But if not, I think there's a lot of people who are willing to do it on their own. Anyway, my conclusion is that I think Newport Beach can do a lot better. And I really encourage for you to think about that. Thank you.
All right, any other comment? Seeing none, bring it back to council. Any further comments from council? Do I see consensus here that the recommended solution here is a good one and that it should come back to council then for action? Okay, staff?
I just wanted to thank staff for working hard on this. As Councilmember Rosansky noted, this is always a challenging issue to make sure you involve the animal advocates, including your city manager, because he adopted his dog from Dover Shores. But I appreciate the work you put on it.
That wasn't your dog in the picture with...
No, it wasn't.
Oh, it looked like
it. Looked like it, yeah. But thank you.
All right, that concludes that agenda item. Now for public comments. Public comments on any item, including public comments on the closed session agenda. Do we have any public comments?
Jim Mosier, Newport Beach. You will be surprised. I actually just wanted to take a moment to thank the council and the city staff for the new study session agenda that seems to be making its debut this afternoon. Not only does it go well beyond the minimal requirements of the Brown Act by explaining in detail what is going to be discussed, but there were actually staff reports summarizing each of the expected presentations available on the internet last Thursday. It's a tremendous improvement and a great aid for members of the public who might be considering whether they should attend in person. So thank you for making the changes, and I hope the staff will be able to continue with this in the future. Thank you.
Actually, I'd like to add my thanks and appreciation. I agree. This is...
We did take the comments seriously, and this is our going forward approach, so thank you for saying that.
All right, any other public comment? No other members of the public here. In that case, we are adjourned to closed session.